couple things. Number one, those of you that were able to be with us last week in Vegas, that was so great to be with you guys and to be able to just hang out. A lot of you guys weren't able to make it, but we thought of you and we missed you, and so we had a really great time. It was pretty cool. Got to meet some of you guys that we hadn't met, and also did some pretty cool content. We got to talk to some guys around some guys that are in the business context, but are guys of faith that actually really spoke into it. But the context that we used, kind of the entire context of the Think Tank Live last week, was really this idea of really speaking to, first of all, let me put this up. Sorry. If you want to invite people to this call, you can scan that deal right now and send it to them. A lot of you guys have asked me, like, how do I get somebody on the call? How do I get somebody on the call? Actually, the best way to get them on the call in the system is just to send them this link that you're going to get from this QR code. It's basically just a form. Kyle from Montana actually asked a really good question this morning. I'm going to let you guys kind of judge your invites, but really we are designing the call that we're doing around what I would term executive level leadership, whatever that means for you. So it's not necessarily like if you've got a bunch of staff and you're like, man, it would be good for them to hear this stuff, reach out to us on the side and we can set up a time to maybe get with your staff and do some of these things if it's helpful. But we're, if you've got another executive pastor or you've got some people that you're like, hey, this would benefit, but it's really not set up for your associate children's pastor and stuff like that to really be, that's not really the target of what we're trying to do. So just keep that in mind. Feel free to invite as many people as you want, but just if you can kind of self-filter as far as the lane that they're in, partly because what we're trying to do, frankly, you guys, is give you guys information, tools, conversation that you can take back to your team, and you can actually operate with your team in a way where you can use this information with them, right? So conversation piece, facilitated conversation. We learned early on in these think tanks over the last few years that a lot of you, and we're all leading and we're in it. And one of our Grow Momentum things is to work on it. And this think tank call is literally a 1-hour pause in your month. Hopefully not the only one where you can work on it, but we're giving you intentionally some things that you can take and then work in it with your team, right? So this is work on it time, and you're going to go, man, I really need to take that to my team. That's awesome. But utilize the stuff, utilize some of our team. If that's helpful, we'll make ourselves available to get on a Zoom with your team to do that. But as you're inviting, especially as you're inviting like fellow pastors or people that are around the country, that's really the sweet spot to get them in there, get them in here and get them to be part of the conversation. So use that form right there to invite people. And it's just a simpler way than, I mean, you can text me and do all of that if you want, but this way we'll get them right into the system. Cool? Cool. Everyone nod like, cool, Lee. All right, cool. All right. Hey, I see Trevor. Trevor, I don't think Trevor's been on the call before. Trevor, have you actually been on the call before?
Yeah, I was on last month. Last month was my first call.
Did we embarrass you and make you introduce yourself?
You did not.
We're going to do that right now. So we missed it. Trev, introduce yourself real quick.
Yeah, Trevor Olesiak. I'm in Jacksonville, Florida area, Senior Director of People and Culture at Celebration Church, and been here 13 years, and also do some executive coaching and things as well. So got my hand in a lot of different things.
You are an occupational polygamist. That's what we call it. So there you go.
Nice.
Love it. It's good to see you, Brent. Steve Owens, you owe me a phone call. All right, here we go. So let's do this today as we kind of get into it. Let me go back. One of the things that we talked about, here's what we're going to do today, is we're going to do two things. We're going to revisit this idea of these paradoxes that we talked about here live, and I'll introduce it for all of you that didn't do it. So we're going to take about 15 or 20 minutes and have a conversation around the current paradoxical challenges of leadership. And yes, I Googled paradoxical this morning, and it actually is a word. So just so you know, I was confused, but it is. And then I'm going to throw it to Holly, who's on the call, and I'll introduce Holly at that point. who's going to talk about specifically an area that she is an expert in and has tools around one-on-one conversations with your team that can continue to build culture and help your team's leadership, help you as you lead your team be as effective as possible. All right. So here's the definition of paradox. For those of you that need it, it says this. Basically, it's a statement that's seemingly contradictory or opposed to common sense, and yet it can still be true. And so it's the reality of kind of the rubber band ideas. So, what are the things that can, it's the biblical concept in some ways of like the last shall be first and the first shall be last. They seem like they're contradictory, but they're really not. Tim Elmore, by the way, has a great book that tackles this in a little bit of a different way. So if you're looking for some leadership reading on paradoxes, it's pretty recent. It's the 8 paradoxes of leadership. And what he talks about in that writing is the idea of like confidence and humility, that leaders need to be both confident and humble, and kind of those ideas of it's not either or, but it's that tension. What we want to talk about today is some of the current tensions that we may be facing as leaders in the current context that we're in. So here's the number one tension, paradox, that we want to bring up. And I want to pause in a second and have you guys give some feedback, even hear from some of you. It's this idea of how do we live in the tension of being farsighted as visionary leaders, right? Your student guy walks in the room and goes, I love serving here, but I don't really know what the vision is for our church. I feel like we're visionless, right? All of those things. How do you deal with developing a farsighted mentality as you lead your church and your team forward versus the paradox of what do we need to be doing in the near term and need to be working? In some ways, it's our term that we use a lot here about working on it and in it. Here's the paradox. COVID, I know, sorry, but the paradox is in COVID and in pandemic or in any crisis, what typically happens in crisis? We immediately go somewhat to nearsighted, right? You're in a crisis in your church. You've got a staff crisis. You've got a financial crisis. Immediately, what just unintentionally jerks us all in is I've got to deal with this right now, right? You remember the days in COVID where we were even sitting on this call and we would say, hey, you really need a 90-day plan. What's your 90-day plan? And that's all we could do because we didn't know what beyond that quarter looked like. But what unfortunately can become a habit with all of us is we lived in that for so long. We also get a lot of affirmation from that and the things that we're knocking out. Our team can sometimes inadvertently get really enamored with that because it feels good. Here's what we're going to do in the next 90 days. We're going to accomplish these things. We're going to check the box on all these things, that it can become a groove or a rut that's unhealthy in your organization. So everything we're doing, every meeting we're having is a nearsighted meeting. We're talking about the next month. We're talking about the next projects. We're talking about the latest crisis in our organization. And so it's a tension of going, how do we at least live enough in where we're headed and where we're going? Hence all the conversation we won't revisit today around 10-year targets, 3-year picture, some of the vision stuff we've been trying to do. Some of you on the call, you want to speak to how you're wrestling with that and maybe even how you're actually overcoming it potentially, or you can actually admit that you're not and just confess in front of everyone how you're managing. Somebody speak to how you're managing that a little bit in your context, far and near. Just unmute and go for it. Jump in.
So without a pastor, it does speed up.
Lindsay, your audio is real bad, bro. Sorry, man.
I'm sorry.
You gotta pay for your internet bill.
Yeah, you gotta have somebody pedal faster. You gotta have somebody go on. Doug, you're at LifePoint up in Lake Stevens. Talk about this tension with you because you work for a little bit of a farsighted individual. How does that look in your week to week? There you go, Doug.
Good question. Yeah, I think that we have a tendency with our staff, like you said, Lee, that there's these constant conversations about today and tomorrow. And I think what myself, along with the executive leadership team, have done is we've just created a space where once a week, we really try to focus on 80 to 90% of our conversations in those gatherings is all about Farsighted. And it seems like oversimplistic, but it really is just, hey, this gathering, this hour that we spend together, and we can have offline conversations about it, but this hour each week, the four of us get in the room and we really try to leave the nearsighted conversations outside the door. And
Is
it's
it-
really
Is that natural, Doug, or do you have to work at it with your team, not necessarily with you guys?
yeah. Well, with the team, you definitely have to work at it. I don't think that it's the coaster, it's the on it, in it conversation. And because it's so easy to default to the nearsighted, to the in it stuff. And that's why what we do is we have like other simple tools like 90-day goals that we set for people that together that's set with the employee, and that's actually tied directly to their financial incentive. And there's both in it goals and there's on it goals. And so the on it goals have a tendency to be more far-sighted. Even if it's 6 months out, we're helping them think and just sort of visualize and picture it in that respect.
Cool. Steve Owens, I know you had meetings yesterday. Be vulnerable on the call. How much of yesterday was in it, and how much was far-sighted, and how much was nearsighted?
Yesterday, 90% was far-sighted.
Love it.
Far-sighted for us, Lee, was a year to 3 to 10 years out was yesterday's conversation. And so and by the way, this is not normal for us. This is something we just started in the last month and a half. I like far-sighted whenever I'm by myself to think and process through. It's different for me to take the team through it. I got to have some help, and I've had some help, but so it's been an adjustment for me, but it's been very beneficial. And so Lee, as you know, it's allowed us to look, let's say 3 years out, and start making progress this week, this month, this quarter, and this year. So it's been, even though we're early on in the game, it's been very beneficial.
But thanks, Steve. As Brandon said in the chat, like it's not just far-sighted. I think, most of us, I don't know what kind of leader you are, what leader you work for. I think maybe I'm working from a bad narrative, but I think generally most organizations that I've been in or dealt with tends to live more in the nearsighted than the farsighted. Maybe you guys are lucky enough to work with a leader that just automatically is farsighted. But I think, if I'm not polling you on the call, but I think generally, I would say this: the drift in any organization is going to be to the nearsighted. I just think left unto itself, that's where you're going to drift, because that's typically where the affirmation comes from. That's where the quick wins come from. But again, hear me, it's not all about go get a vision and just live out there in dreamland. It's also really, as Steve said so well, it's like, how does the far-sighted conversations drive what we're doing in a nearsighted way, right? So it's that constant work on it. Here's a couple other paradoxes that we talked about last week in our when we were here live, but some of you on the call didn't get to see them. Here's some of them. So we said this: paradox of gathering versus engagement, right? And what does that look like? Wow. Like this could be a whole conversation. Like we want people to show the heck up. We want to get, right? Like let's all be honest. Like we are at that point now where we're like, man, how do we get people physically back in the building? We talked to Ryan Pineda at our think tank last week, who's a big social media influencer guy. And one of the things that he said, even living in a digital world, is he said, I believe that church is best done physically in person. And I know some of us are like, yeah, but Meta, online, and all of that. Oh, I agree. And that's a conversation for another day. But the reality of the benefit of the gathering in person, it's, I think we all agree, like, it's a big deal, right? Whatever our online strategy is, that in-person gathering, but it's also the tension. Engagement is the new attendance. So, you know, are we going to spend all our time trying to get people to show up, or are we actually going to continue to do what we said we were going to do in pandemic and actually engage people? That's a real paradox. By show of hands, how many of you are wrestling with this one right now? Maybe it's just us, right? But it really is. One of the ways we're dealing with this, you guys, is, I think and I'll move on, but one of the ways we're dealing with this in the Crossing context, where we're at here, is we're trying to create a degree of FOMO on our weekends with our gatherings, both in person and online, but really with our physical gatherings, fear of missing out. And so I would challenge some of you guys on the call to really, maybe if you've leaned out of what your gathering is encompassing, it might be time for you to re-engage with your team, with your senior leader, or if you are the senior leader, with what are our gatherings about? What I mean by that is, are you giving people a reason to actually show up? Right? Like, and I get it. I get the spiritual aspect of, yes, they should want to show up to glorify God and to be around other people. I get it. But are we giving people a reason from week to week to look at it and go, yeah, there is a reason. I do not want to miss this gathering at Fresh Life, at Compass, at Coastline. I do not want to miss this. Like, are we thinking through our gatherings, or are we just 3 songs and a 45-minute message and out? That would be my challenge to you. Are we thinking through our gatherings as far as, are they actually leading to more engagement, or are they standing alone over here? How do we leverage engagement to drive gatherings, and how do we drive gatherings to create more engagement? All right, I'll give you 30 seconds to comment on that, because I'm almost in Holly time here. Derek, we've wrestled with this here too, Bocamp, a little bit, right? Because we don't want to create a circus either. So what's the tension there?
Yeah, I know that, and I've heard you say it too, like, we have to be careful of what we win people with, we keep people with. So we can't win them with the constant show and giant events, but how can we do something even 10, 20, 30% more on a weekend, and then be ready, Lee, like you're talking about, how do we have ways for people to engage further than that? Because again, at the end of the day, and we're wrestling with this in a campus context, if we're just doing giant block parties every single month and seeing number surges, and then we dip back down, we're just doing activity. So it's trying to walk that out of, like, if we can get people there, how do we engage them at that point on a deeper level?
Anybody else want to speak to that?
I can't. We have the same issue. We want to make sure that we are being able to engage people. So many times, you know, it's like a performance, and we don't want to be about the performance. We want to bring people back so they can feel like they're part of something more important. And that's something that we review every week when we're planning, when we go through our worship planning meeting, is what is going to be our engagement step.
Love it. Brent, you're in Fresno, right? Yep. It's great. Anybody else want to comment on that?
We just had our like a yearly vision weekend, and we tried to do that the FOMO, where we had barbecue and we had some things that were only available in person. And, you know, so when I was, you know, speaking to the cameras, you know, I was acknowledging the fact that there were people watching, and some were traveling, but some were in town, and kind of made the joke, like, yeah, I wish we could do Uber Eats. You know what I mean? Wish we could send some of this, you know, the wafting smell of barbecue your way, but you gotta, you know, you need to be here for that. And, you know, just acknowledging the online campus, but not shaming them, right? You know, acknowledging that they're there, and but also that they're missing out on, there's certain things that they're not going to get unless they're there.
And one of the things that we're doing in many of our churches with Momentum and here at the Crossing is that, and I appreciate what Brent just said, we are leaning into people that are choosing online, but we're actually just leaning into the erratic nature of people's attendance and or engagement with our physical gatherings, right? Because if we're church on mission, we're not discounting the gatherings. And so we got to be careful around that. Let me give you the second one, systems versus innovation. This is that idea of like some of you guys are doing vision planning and 10-year target and all that stuff. We want you to do systems, but we also want to make sure that you're not systematizing yourself out of innovation, right? And sometimes the system or the discipline of running a system can actually snuff out the innovation that the Holy Spirit wants you to be operating in. So I think it's a paradox. So I don't think it's just let's innovate, let's change, let's do something new all the time. I think it's how do we use the system to actually tee up the innovation that we have. I'll give you an example from our context here. We try to worship program pretty creatively, and we try to do it as far out as possible. And part of the strategy is not just the logistics of let's do it far out. Part of it is if we get an idea at the last minute, we want to be able to execute that innovative idea because we've done everything else ahead of time to allow the space for that last minute innovation to actually be executed. So we're not running the system. We don't have the discipline, then we're not able to have the margin to actually pivot or to give that last 10% in any of the contexts that we're in. So that's the system versus innovation conversation that I think we all should be having. Okay, last one is, sorry, working my screen here. Oh, there it is. Oh. Sorry guys, I'm an idiot. Oh, the last one, I'm sorry. The last one is really going to throw us to Holly because it's the health versus hustle. There it is. So it's gathering engagement, systems and innovation, and then health versus hustle. Before I introduce Holly though, let me put this up on the screen real quick. This is a video that we used last week in our live that I want to give you guys an opportunity to actually grab if you would like. This is a guy by the name of Lance Witt. Some of you are familiar with some of his writings. He writes a lot around team health. It's good stuff. And he did a video for our think tank for our live and for you guys. And so we just wanted to make that available. You can scan the screen right now if you want, but this deck is going to come to you after the call. So if you want to grab that, but Lance really, he's talking a little bit more around personal development and health than where Holly's going to go. And so I just wanted to give you guys access to that video. Okay, so this is my friend Holly. She's been a real friend of us, of Growmentum and all of that. And she's a rock star and is working in a fairly new organization called Leader, L-E-A-D-R. And so we've interacted a little bit in some different contexts. Some of you, if you were at the XP conference in New Hampshire, you may have seen Holly. She was emceeing like a rock star and doing some stuff. But I asked Holly to come in today. She's here, obviously she works with Leader, but she's here just to work with you guys today and to give you some food for thought around the health and hustle conversation, but really specifically around pushing on us, and I'm okay if she pushes on all of us, towards how much time are you spending with your team face to face, and is that time actually productive for your team? And so she's got a lot of learnings there that I'm going to turn it over to her to share. And she also has some stuff that she's doing with her organization. If you're interested in later, you can reach out to her and make that happen. So Holly, you're up.
Thanks.
Hey.
Lee. And at what time are we going to the top of the hour? Just to make sure that I don't talk too much.
Just about 5 minutes before we'll wrap it up.
Okay, perfect. Well, hey, everybody, I'm Holly Tate. So excited to be with you today. Lee is my favorite fellow Enneagram 8. We've had fun doing lots of partnerships together and equipping church leaders like you. So I've been in the church leadership space now for over 10 years, which is wild. I spent about 9 of those years at a company called Vanderbloemen, helping churches build their best teams through staffing and executive search. And I'm going to share my screen so we can look at some stats together that towards the end of my time at Vanderbloemen, which was in 2020, started to see quite a few things happening, like I'm sure many of you did, which was the Great Resignation. So what was so interesting about the Great Resignation that, Lee, I know you guys talked about this, I guess it was last week, and you just mentioned it, but what started with the Great Resignation was this, a lot of, the shared trauma and chaos that we were all going through. It was also a lot of organizations, including churches, that were unfortunately having to tighten up budgets and lay people off. And so people were opting out and saying, you know what, I think I'm looking at something else. But then it changed to people having a new look on life and what they wanted to do with their careers, which has also turned into quiet quitting. So we've got lots of transformation happening in the workforce right now that is also being experienced in the church world. Unfortunately, which maybe Lee and I can put our heads together and solve this problem, but there's not a ton of great church specific data on these problems. And so the best data that exists was actually a 2020 survey. It was November of 2020 by Barna that said 30% of pastors are thinking about leaving ministry altogether. 30% of pastors are thinking about leaving ministry altogether, not even just changing churches, but leaving ministry altogether. And so first, I want to recognize that there might be people on this call that are thinking about that. And we see you, we've led through a really hard season, and want to just encourage you to hang in there, stick with it. You are needed for the future of the kingdom in your church. But this is a huge problem that we're facing as leaders. And so as we've started to look at the data of this, I want to put some numbers behind this, because the term Great Resignation and quiet quitting has been thrown around as buzzwords, but what does the data actually say? So this was the latest Gallup data that came out earlier this year was that 79%, very accurate, 79% of employees are not engaged in their work. So to me, I'm a pictures person, less of a data person. So that's 8 out of 10 people on our team. So think about your team right now, 10 people. The data tells us that on average, 8 of those people are disengaged in their work that they're doing in their role at your church. So yes, this costs us a lot of money in their annual salary. So for our executive pastors or our finance directors, our CFOs in our churches that are on the line, that's probably where your brain is going. But for those of us who are leading these teams, what's more important is the loss of mission and the loss of our goals and the impact in our communities that's having when we have disengaged employees. And when we at Leaders started to think about, okay, what are churches actually facing? We've got almost 800 churches, about a third of those being the largest churches in the country that are on our platform. And so we started doing interviews, like, okay, if 8 out of 10 employees are disengaged, what is the problem that's standing in the way from keeping them engaged? And so this is where I want to hear from you guys in the chat. Where do you feel like you tend to fall on this tension scale? So Leah, I loved what you described as managing this tension as leaders of like getting the job done, executing the mission, and also the care and development of our people. So for me personally, I naturally fall on the getting the job done and executing the mission side. I love to jump in there, do, the nearsighted tasks that you were just talking about, Lee, check the things off the list, and have to be really more intentional about really pausing and truly making the care and development of my team a priority. Whereas we've got other leaders who, especially in ministry, who are so caring, so relational, so gifted in the care part of it, that it's really difficult for them to drive outcomes, drive performance, and drive goals. So I'm going to pull up the chat here. Would love to hear from you guys on where you tend to fall on the tension scale. So we've got Mark. Shout out to Mark for being vulnerable enough to lead the way and share. Falling on getting the job done. I can so relate. Yeah, Joseph, getting the job done. Trevor, care and development is my right-handed dribble. I love that. Getting the job done is left-handed dribble. That's so good. What a great picture to think about there. Aaron.
Come on, Trevor. That's great.
Yeah. So this is so interesting. We've got about 50-50, which is what I see in church leaders. It is typically, and especially depending on the role that we sit in on the team, of where we tend to fall. Now, ideally, we need both of these to be effective leaders and to have effective teams. And so what we all need to do is try to make sure that we're sitting as much as possible right in the middle, that we're driving outcomes, we're driving high-performing teams because we have the most important mission that's ever existed, but also caring for and developing our people. When we swing so far on the getting the job done, that's where we see burnout, disconnection, quiet quitting, and a lot of the symptoms that have happened from the Great Resignation. And so when we went and did a lot of these interviews with church leaders, here are the 6 problems that stood in the way the most. And so I would love to hear from you guys. What stands in the way for you and your team the most? So the first is tyranny of the urgent. Lee, you just talked about this a few minutes ago. That's the hustle part of it, right? That's the nearsighted topics that get put at the top of the to-do list every day, and the far-sighted ones that often get pushed down until the last minute. We've also got the generational gap. So this is the first time in history that we've had 5 generations in the workforce. So think about your church staff. There are many churches out there that've got the silent generation of folks who have been on the church staff for a really, really long time, depending on how old our churches are. And then we've got Gen Z, and a lot of times Gen Alpha is even beginning to be interns in our church staff. So that can cause a lot of tension around how we lead our people well. Then we've got the lack of consistent structure. So, Lee's going to lead his team a lot different from the way that Derek leads his team, because you're different people, you have different experiences, you have, different leaders that have been in your life that have helped develop you along the way. And so when we're not intentional about that framework and structure in our churches, that's where employees can have very different disconnected experiences. And then, of course, the disconnection of remote working and hybrid. And I'm hearing this while, most of our churches are very much in person. We've got more flexibility than we've ever had. People aren't necessarily required to be in the office the same amount that they were before. And so how do we truly lead and develop our people well when we have different work rhythms than we have before? And then I think that 1 through 4 often leads to 5 and 6. I think 5 and 6 are often symptoms of 1 through 4, but we're seeing this across the board. Burnout, that's the quiet quitting buzzword right now, and then staff turnover, which we're still seeing in churches.
Hey, Holly, real quick. I'll be vulnerable with the group, and maybe no one else is like this. Sometimes I have a level of frustration with some of my team in the sense of, in that paradox of health. Like sometimes I feel like they're hyper health focused. Does that make sense? Like, oh, it's all about my personal health, and I don't want, and you're asking me and I know I sound like a king, an old guy, right? But it's like, sometimes I just want them to toughen up a little bit. And so what's the tension there between acknowledging our need to bring health, and maybe I'm the outlier, but also going, how do we make sure that they understand that hustle is an expectation?
So good, Lee. Yes, this is very common in younger millennials and Generation Z, especially. Because I think that, they saw the generations that went before him that had that hustle culture, especially older millennials and Gen X, that had very much a hustle, that's hard to say, hustle culture, and they want to swing the other way. And it's also, the generation that has grown up with getting on-demand feedback and being able to post a picture on their phone and get that affirmation immediately, and which has bred an individualistic outlook. And so that's brought into the workforce and into what they expect from their jobs and their managers. And so for me personally, where I've made mistakes leading the younger generation that I've found typically thinks that way, is I have done a poor job of setting clear goals and expectations. So what I find is, no matter how old we are or, what our background is, that we all want to win. Every single person wants to win. And it's on us as the leader to set those intentional and clear goals, which we have found is one of the key indicators of employee engagement across the board, which is clarity. And so I've found when I've done a bad job, or I'm hearing that a lot from the younger people on my team, I'm going, man, they're directionalists. What they're trying to communicate to me is that they don't know what winning looks like, and they feel overwhelmed. And it's because I haven't set very clear goals and expectations about what winning looks like in their role. So that's a personal thing that I've learned in leading Generation Z, and hopefully a helpful tip to folks. Okay, so thank you guys so much for participating in the chat. This was so great. And this is what I hear the most, which is 1 and 3. 3 came up so often in the chat. 1 is the most common. I struggle with that as a leader the most, is tyranny of the urgent. And because of a lot of the reasons that you said, Lee, of often it's that gratification of just accomplishing a lot of little things during the day that keeps us from doing the really important strategic, far-sighted work. So what we learned when we were doing all this research about what stands in the way from employee engagement is, okay, how do we fix the problem? And so we found 5 indicators across the board in high performing, high impact teams. And so what we're going to spend our time together for the rest of the day is on number 1, but I want to walk through all 5 of these. And what's important here is that we understand that we don't have to be perfect at all of these. It's that we're being intentional about each of these and just starting where we are and taking that next step and trying to provide every team member these 5 foundations, these 5 characteristics. So number 1, which we're going to talk a lot about this the rest of our time together, is that every team member is having an intentional one-on-one meeting with their manager at least bi-weekly. I'm a huge fan of weekly because I believe that organizations move at the speed of trust. And if we're not meeting with our direct reports on a weekly basis, then often that's where we start to feel that drag and slow down inside of our organizations and the mission that we're working towards. The second one is that every team member wants to be understood and recognized for their unique strengths that they bring to the table. This is especially important for the next generation that desires to be seen and understood. The third one is that every team member receives frequent feedback from their manager. 60% of Generation Z desires to have a weekly, if not daily, check-in with their manager. Doesn't have to be formal, but they want that constant, instant feedback, which makes sense because, again, they can go to Amazon and order something to be delivered on their doorstep within 2 hours. It's how they live their life. It's what they expect of us as leaders and in their workplace. The fourth one is that every team member has clearly documented goals. This is a big one. A lot of us are great at setting those goals, but then we forget them. It's been 3 months. We set it 3 months ago, and then we forgot about it. We never discussed it again. And that's where our team can start to feel whiplash or confusion because they don't know what winning looks like. And then the fifth one is every team member has a personalized learning and development plan. And this one, I think we can overthink a lot of times. We feel like we have to spend this, many months coming up with this perfect development pathway for every single person on our team. What I want to encourage us to take away from this conversation today is just to take that one next step. So if we're currently not doing anything with the characteristic number 5, maybe that means reading a book with your team this month. Maybe that means providing some funds for somebody to go through a course or continuing education. It doesn't have to be a super structured thing. It's great to work towards that, but just to provide the space for each employee to be able to take their best next step in their journey of where they want to go within your church staff or ministry in general. All right, so what I want to spend our time on today is the one-on-one meeting that Lee mentioned. And this is the best way that we can really navigate that tension between hustle and care. Or what was the other H word? Hustle and
Hustle and health and hustle.
Health.
How do we keep our team healthy, and how do we make sure they're still hustling?
Yes, that's it was the health word. I was like, I know it's care. What was it? And so this is what we have found working with almost 800 churches now, is that the one-on-one meeting is the most powerful leadership development tool that exists. And so I'm going to give you 5 ways of how to lead effective one-on-ones. So I don't know about you guys, but this is a screenshot of my calendar back in February, which is very normal for me. This is usually what my week looks like. It's full, it's packed.
I'm going to kick you off this call. Just put it away.
I know, right?
Lord.
And so the natural inclination, like especially this week that you're looking at, I had a speaking engagement on a Tuesday and on a Thursday. I've got all my one-on-ones in here. I've got project meeting, we're all managing so many things. So the first thing that often happens is we do this. I go, oh, you know what? I talked to Carissa the other day. She's doing great. She's bought in. She's aligned. We caught up. So I'm going to cancel that one-on-one this week. Or, oh, Matt, yeah, I sent him an email of my updates. We're all good. Well, what happens over time when we do this is our team starts to feel like they're not as important of whatever that urgent thing was that you were doing that day. They start to go, okay, Holly is prioritizing her projects over me as a person. And so that's why the one-on-one meeting is so powerful, for us to create intentional space that we hold on our calendar for every single one of our direct reports. And I don't know about you guys, but I've worked for folks who did that to me, where I would go in and sit there and wait for our one-on-one to start. And then I would find out that They weren't showing, my leader wasn't showing up that day. And it doesn't feel good. And not only does it not feel good, but it also allows so much momentum to be lost within our ministries. Okay, so let's walk through together how to not do that, not cancel our one-on-ones and have lead effective one-on-ones. So we're going to walk through, put on your seatbelt. We're going to do this in about 5 minutes. And I know Lee's going to send out these slides afterwards. So no worries writing all of it down. But 5 steps to an effective one-on-one. These are going to sound basic, but they're so important for us to go back to the foundational one-on-ones of leadership. So first of all, we've got to be present. As a leader, it's so tempting for us to, for me especially, fly in and out of meetings because I'm in them all day. But for my direct reports, this might be one of their only meetings, and they really have looked forward to this, and they need things from me in that meeting. And so for us to really lead with empathy, put ourselves in the shoes of our direct reports, make sure we're being present and prioritizing our time with them. This is really important when we're on Zoom. I spend a lot of my day on Zoom in one-on-ones. And when I've got text messages and Slacks flying in, it's easy for me to just get distracted and not give that person the time and attention that they deserve. So prioritize being present, turn off those notifications, be fully present with each of your team members in that one-on-one. Okay, number 2 is prepare. I don't know about you guys, but walking into a one-on-one meeting where the other person hasn't even thought about it, there's no intentionality. Again, it just communicates to our team member that they're just not as important as the other things on our to-do list. And so this is a lot of words. What I want you to take away from this is when you go into a one-on-one meeting, I want you to focus on 3 things. The first is care. The second is that person's development. And the third is that person's performance. It's not a perfect formula, but overall, we want to make sure that we're asking that team member, how are you really doing? This is really important in ministry because most of our team members in ministry are going to want to be like, yeah, I'm okay. And not admit when they really aren't doing okay and when they need help. So carve out space for really digging into how are you, and I'll even write this in my one-on-one, like, how are you really doing in capital, REALY, just to make sure that they know that I'm going to stop and talk about this to really dig into how they're doing. The second one is development. And so this is about the person's development. Again, it's helping them take that best next step. How can I help remove obstacles and helping them get where they want to be in their role, achieving their goals, and in their next step in ministry? And then third is performance. So I find this a lot in ministry where we are afraid of hard and feedback conversations. And so we avoid them. And all that person hears is, we love you, we love you, we love you, you're fired. That's on us as a leader. If it's a surprise to that person, when we have to let them go because we're not being intentional about bringing up performance conversations, even when they're hard, in that intentional one-on-one meeting.
I'm going to interrupt you real quick, Holly. One of the things two things. One is I want to give these guys a chance just to pause you for a second because this is so amazing. This part specifically, I want you guys to hear, because I think I've personally been guilty of doing exactly what Holly just said. Like, I want to be positive with people. And so every time I meet with them, I'm affirming, right? Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, I'm taking notes over here that's like, yeah, you're not killing it. And so I'm unfortunately guilty of giving people mixed messages that I feel like they want to hear until I'm done and I'm over it. And so, Holly, how do you make sure that happens? How do you, I know this is probably another conversation, but how do you make sure that when you're meeting one-on-one, and then I'm going to ask the harder question for you, and then we'll start to move towards wrap. So number 1, how do you make sure that happens? And 2, how the heck do these guys carve out the time to do all these one-on-ones in a way that's actually not overwhelming? Because some of them, your calendar gave them PTSD.
I know. Well, but your calendar doesn't have to look like mine, but yes, we'll definitely talk about that. So I'm going to skip number 3. I'm going to go back to in a second, but to answer your question, Lee, my 4th tip here. So we did 1 and 2, which was be present, prepare. I'm going to come back to 3. Number 4 is to talk about performance. Don't let weeks go by without talking about performance. The number 1 way that you can make sure you're doing this consistently is by having their goals front and center. So of course, we have our software that allows this to happen, for goals to be front and center with every person I'm talking to, but you don't have to have our software to do this. Just make sure that every single one-on-one, you are talking about the goals that you've set with that person. And the idea is that they're proactively coming to you in that one-on-one because you've set the expectation that this one-on-one is for you. I want you to come with updates on your performance, your projects, how you're doing. And the best thing you can do is to say, how are you tracking on your goals? And how can I remove bottlenecks for you in those? And so make sure that that is a recurring agenda item in your one-on-one that you're talking about performance. You've got to make it a priority. So that would be my answer to that one. You said you had another question. Do you want me to cover 3 and 5 real quick?
Yeah, cover them real quick and then wrap them up with like whether they're using this tool or not. Like, how would you suggest they begin this process with their team if they're not already doing it?
Perfect. Yep. So let's go back to number 3. This is have perspective. This one's key. We've got to think about and have empathy for the conversation that we're about to have with our team. So if we are having that difficult performance conversation, probably don't want to do that at a coffee shop where there might be tears involved or frustrations, especially in ministry when there might be somebody that goes to our church in that coffee shop. But the other way to think about it is if we're constantly asking our team to come to our office for one-on-ones, that can feel like an unsafe place sometimes. If they've had a negative experience with an executive leader before, where all they got was negative feedback in their office, it might be better to go to a different conference room or you go to their office for one-on-ones. But have perspective of how can we create an environment of psychological safety for that person that we're meeting with? And we've got to have the perspective that they're walking into the one-on-one with in order to do that well. All right, so be present, always prepare, have perspective, make sure we talk about performance. And then the 5th one is personalization. So we want to make sure that we are not being a manager and we're being a coach. That's part of our mantra here at Leader, is to turn every manager into a coach. And so personalize the coaching conversation to that person based on their personality type or how they're wired. A one-on-one with an Enneagram 8 is going to look very different than a one-on-one with an Enneagram 9. And we need to know that about our team in order to make sure that we're serving them well and customizing our coaching to who they are. So one way for you to measure the effectiveness of your one-on-one is look at body language. Pay attention to how you and your team member are leaving that one-on-one. Are their shoulders sagging? Are they frustrated? Are they feeling defeated every single time? Or are they leaving with their head held high, excited to go back to work? It doesn't mean that every one-on-one is going to be full of rainbows and butterflies and unicorns. There might have to be some hard conversations, but making sure that we're having those hard conversations well, we're setting clear goals and expectations with our team. So let me go to this summary slide here. And again, you guys will get these, but again, the whole goal here is that intentional and better conversations build more trust with our team, which builds engagement, which allows us to accomplish our missions as our church. And so those are the 5 pillars that we talked through. And the next step is to get your one-on-ones on the calendar. And so Lee, when I get that question of, I don't have time to have one-on-ones with every one of my direct reports, usually my response is, you have too many direct reports. So the way that I like to say it is, if you can't share a pizza with your direct reports, you likely have too many. So how can you replicate leaders? How can you build, whether it's a coach level or you're developing that next level of leadership to help do some of those one-on-ones? So you're developing them and you're developing the people under them. But the reality is you don't not have time to have one-on-ones. It is the #1 leadership development tool that you have. Put it on the calendar and make sure it's at least bi-weekly. And it's going to be amazing to see how your team is engaged and growing when you have those regular one-on-ones.
Okay, guys. So in the chat, you saw what Veach put. I think that pretty much sums up for most of us this conversation. I'll read Kyle's quote in the chat. He says, when you think you're good at one-on-ones until Holly lets you know you're not. So
that's hilarious.
Basically, maybe, and again, I don't want to speak for everybody, but Holly, first of all, thank you so much. And as Holly said, we're going to include these. Don't jump off just yet, guys, if you can hang in for a second. We're going to include these in our post-call wrap-up, these slides that Holly contained. And I know Holly will make herself available to you. Obviously they have tools that they're developing and continuing to develop that some of you are using. We're using it. I'm using it even with Growmentum, and some of you that I'm working with, I'm using the Leader software to actually set up our calls, to start using that to be helpful as we do our one-on-ones. So there's a lot of tools. Again, Holly was so gracious to come on and, just kind of share, here's their learnings. And so however you end up, as she said, however you end up utilizing it, I know she would love to have a conversation with you around how they can help with that. But at the end of the day, their goal is, let's make our teams healthier, right? Because I think really the answer to the paradox, hopefully, is the healthier they are, the more hustle they will bring. I hope that's actually what will be the result of us taking this time. All right. So, guys, as I said, we're going to wrap this call up, and you guys can continue to dialogue. Might even make a breakout available, or a deeper dive, as we call it. If you want a deeper dive, I'll touch base with Holly and see if there's some people that want to jump on a call in a week or so with her. Specifically, if this is a topic that interests you on a deeper level, we can make that available. Joe, do you want to unmute? I've got a really weird thing I'm going to ask you to do, but Joe is doing some, I know I'm really pivoting hard here. Joe is doing some social media for us, and he would love for you guys to do something in the next half hour. Joe, Joe, are you on there?
Yeah, I'm right here, Lee. Hey, what's up, everybody? Hey, if you guys would just do us a massive favor, and really you're doing yourself a massive favor, you're doing many churches massive favors. Would you go on our social media account at Growmentum on Instagram? Give it a follow. We're gonna be posting a lot of helpful content, a lot of the stuff that Holly and Lee has shared today. We really want to begin to curate this because we know more churches need to hear some of this stuff. So especially these conversations about how to have an effective one-on-one, how to help people get unstuck maybe in these moments where they're just like, what do we do? Like, there's so much to go on. So if you would just go, give it a follow, give it a share. It's always so helpful with that. So yeah, thanks guys for what you guys do. And any pushing towards Growmentum is so helpful to really ultimately helping the kingdom. So thanks guys.
Yeah, so that was unapologetic plug right there, but we're trying to offer this for as many people as possible. The content we're just giving away, Holly's content we're just giving away, but obviously our goal is for you guys to be better at really accomplishing the Great Commission and the mission that God has given us. All right, you guys, just praying for you guys. I know our team that's on here, Derek, Brandon, and Jeff is on here. Kay was tied up in some L10 meetings today, for those of you that know what that is. So he was unable to join us, but make sure that you guys do use that form. If there are other people on executive level that you would love to get involved in these conversations. And as always, our team is available to you guys to come alongside you in helping you craft your vision, helping you work on it and in it. Not just in a practical way, but also as you look at Farsighted, if you're like, I have no idea how to do that, we'd love to be able to help you craft that with some of the tools that we have. All right, you guys are awesome. We're going to wrap it up. Holly, again, I think Holly is still there. Maybe she had to cut out. There she is. Thanks so much for being here, you guys. All right, see you next month.